Back in 2016, I was in my senior year of high school. It was the very last week of school, so everything was laid back. The grades were already turned in, and everyone was just waiting for graduation. My friend, who everyone called Moose, was cutting class with me. We decided to hang out in my car in the senior parking lot to smoke. While we were sitting there, our friend Mario, who was in the lunchroom, texted me to come chill with him. So, Moose and I got out and started walking back toward the building. We decided to enter through one of the discreet back doors of the school, the one right by the band and chorus rooms. Just as we were about to walk inside, Mario texted again, saying the school was going into a lockdown. At first, we did not think much of it. We pulled on the back door, and to our surprise, it was still unlocked. We stepped inside, and that was when we noticed the red lockdown lights flashing in the tiny band hallway. The hallway was quiet. This was the quietest section of the school, with very little foot traffic, because it was far from the regular classrooms. I immediately took out my phone and texted Mario. I asked him what was going on and if this was just a drill. Moose and I stood there in the dim corridor waiting for his reply. A few seconds later, Mario texted back. He wrote, "Dude, holy," and then he stopped. On my screen, the typing bubble appeared. Moose and I stared at the screen, holding our breath. We watched those three dots dance for about 30 seconds, and then suddenly they disappeared. No text came through. I quickly typed out 3 question marks and hit send, but I did not get a response. At this point, we did not know what to do. The main hallway lights had been automatically shut off. The only things lighting up the corridor were the dim emergency backup lights and the rhythmic red flashing of the lockdown sirens. There were no teachers around. We walked over to the auditorium doors and tried to open them, but they were already locked tight. Just as we turned away, Moose tapped my shoulder. He did not say a word. He just pointed down the long hallway. Way down at the other end, I could see a figure. Someone dressed in all black was speed-walking directly in our direction. At first, in the dim, red-tinted light, I thought it was just a teacher. But as the person got closer, our stomachs dropped. We realized the person was wearing some kind of mask. Moose and I instinctively started walking backward. The figure was moving with an intense, aggressive energy. As they got closer, we could clearly see the mask. It was a pale, rotting, horrific face. It looked like a decayed corpse. It was completely disgusting and terrifying. The person was now far too close. They were moving toward us with clear, violent intent. Moose and I did not wait. We spun around and started sprinting back toward the band room. We prayed that the band teacher, Miss Bryant, would be inside and could let us in. We reached the door and started pounding on it, but there was no answer. We did not have time to wait. We had to split up. Moose ran one way, and I ran the other. I saw a small music department closet. I pulled the door open, stepped inside, and quietly shut it. I turned off the light and squeezed myself behind a large plastic equipment container. The closet door had a glass window. Because the hallway was lit by the pulsing red emergency lights, I could see out. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching. I immediately ducked my head down behind the container, holding my breath. The footsteps stopped right outside the closet door. For a long moment, there was absolute silence. I slowly peeked my head up to look through the glass window. The man in the pale, rotting mask was standing right outside the door, staring directly through the glass. I instantly ducked back down, hoping he had not seen me. Then I heard the creak of the closet door opening. The man stepped inside. I could hear him rustling around, trying to find the light switch. But because the closet was dark, he could not find it. After a few terrifying seconds, he gave up. I heard his heavy footsteps quickly walk away. Once the footsteps faded, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. I saw a long text message from Mario. He explained that a student had just been stabbed in one of the bathrooms by a masked man carrying a blade. My heart stopped. Then, a message from Moose came through. He said he was all right. He had run back outside and was safe inside his car. I realized staying in the school was way too dangerous. I waited to make sure the hallway was empty, and then I sprinted out of the closet, through the back door, and straight to my car. I sat in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and watched as cop cars began to swarm the school. At least 10 police officers rushed into the building. Moose came over and got into my car. We watched for over half an hour. The school was eventually let out early, with police officers escorting the students out of the building. the police never found the masked man inside the school that day. It was highly likely that he escaped through one of the back doors. Helicopters searched the surrounding woods and neighborhoods all day, but they never caught him. To this day, he was never identified. I still thank my lucky stars that I decided to hide when I did, and that I did not end up in that bathroom. Now, you would think a school lockdown is a rare, once-in-a-lifetime event. But for students in other parts of the country, it was a terrifyingly regular occurrence. Take this second story, which unfolded a few years later at a high school in a low-income neighborhood. This school was located in a rough area, which meant that security drills were a regular part of life. The students were used to fire drills and lockdown drills, and they knew the protocol by heart. Whenever the alarm sounded, the teacher would lock the classroom door, turn off the lights, and everyone would quietly huddle in the far corner of the room, away from the windows. It was a cold day during the third quarter of the school year. The windows of the classroom were shut tightly to keep out the chill. The teacher was in the middle of a lesson when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. From somewhere outside, we could hear the faint sound of shouting. It was a chaotic, angry commotion. The teacher walked over to the window to see what was happening. He opened the window slightly, but by the time he did, the shouting seemed to stop. But just as he was about to close the window, the loudspeaker crackled to life. The dean's voice came through, announcing that the school was immediately going into a lockdown. The teacher did not hesitate. He rushed to the door, locked it, and turned off the lights. The students quickly moved to the designated corner of the room, packing themselves together in the dark. Time seemed to slow down as we sat there in the silence. Suddenly, a series of blood-curdling screams echoed from the hallway. These were not the high-pitched screams of students. They were deep, raw, and angry screams of an adult man. It was the same voice we had heard outside. Someone dangerous was inside the building. Because our school was underfunded, we did not have any security guards. We were completely on our own until the police arrived. The screams in the hallway grew closer. Then we heard heavy, violent bangs on a nearby classroom door. We could hear the terrified screams of the children in the next room. The footsteps started moving toward our door. The screaming was right outside our classroom now. Suddenly, the door rattled violently as someone began slamming their weight against it. A couple of kids in our room started to cry. The man on the other side of the door was completely out of his mind. He kept screaming nonsensical things, shouting that he was sick of it, and telling everyone to just stop already. Then, we heard a loud, sickening crash. The man had smashed his elbow right through the small, thin glass window of our classroom door. The glass shattered onto the floor. Through the shattered window, a hand and arm reached into the classroom. The man was groping around, trying to find the lock on the inside of the door, but our teacher did not panic. He calmly walked over to his desk, grabbed a pair of heavy metal scissors, and walked straight toward the door. Without hesitation, he drove the scissors into the intruder's arm. The man let out a howl of pain. He pulled his bleeding arm back out. He slammed his body against the door a few more times in pure rage, and then we heard him run down the hallway, crying out in pain. A few minutes later, police arrived. At least 6 police cruisers pulled up, and officers quickly apprehended the intruder. It turned out the man was suffering from a severe mental health crisis. While he was not armed with a gun, his intentions were clear, and he was immediately taken to a mental hospital. But there is one sound that every student dreads more than anything else: the sound of a gunshot. And that brings us to our third story, which happened at a high school in California. Like most schools there, they held a mandatory lockdown drill once every month, so the students never took them seriously. But on this afternoon, the alarm went off, and it was definitely not a drill. I was in the cafeteria during my lunch period, when the teacher in charge of the room grabbed the microphone. He ordered everyone to be quiet. He sounded genuinely terrified, and his voice was shaking. He announced that the school was going into a lockdown. The entire room went dead silent. Everyone looked around with wide, nervous eyes, and then a loud echoing crack shattered the silence. It was the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Complete panic erupted. Some kids ran for the exits. The teacher on the microphone screamed for everyone to hide under the tables as he locked the heavy cafeteria doors and shut off all the lights. My friends and I scrambled under a table, our hearts pounding. We lay flat against the floor waiting in the dark. Suddenly a wave of screams broke out across the room. We peeked out and saw a student with a gun standing right outside the locked glass door. He started shooting directly at the glass door. The glass cracked but did not shatter immediately. The entire lunchroom cleared out through the side exit doors. We ran out into the open air, sprinting as fast as we could. Students ran to their cars or off the property into the neighborhood. I lived close to the school, so I ran all the way home. As I ran, I saw police cars already speeding toward the campus. When I got home, my dad turned on the news. Miraculously, only one girl was wounded in the attack, and the police were able to apprehend the shooter alive. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. A lot of horror movies are legitimately scary, but in some cases, the events that took place on the sets of certain horror movies were more terrifying than the movies themselves. A number of horrifying incidents have taken place on the sets of some of the most successful horror movies of all time, before, during, or shortly after filming. Whether or not these incidents were fatal accidents, cruel twists of fate, or some sort of evil curse still remains debatable. Perhaps a good place to start would be the Amityville Horror House, whose events may start to seem even scarier when you learn that horrors also took place on the sets for both the 1979 movie and the 2005 remake. The first Amityville movie starred James Brolin, who was not originally eager to take on the role, but eventually he accepted it because of something strange that happened while reading the script. One morning, as he got to a scary section of the story, a pair of the actor's pants suddenly fell off a hanger in his closet, causing him to literally jump out of his chair in fright. James, of course, saw this as a sign that he needed to take the role, and the rest was history. Fast forward to the 2005 remake, with Ryan Reynolds taking on the part that was originally played by James Brolin. During filming, Ryan Reynolds, along with other cast members, claimed that every morning at exactly 3:15 they would wake up. The reason why that is terrifying is because 3:15 in the morning was the exact time that Ronald DeFeo murdered his entire family in the house, and it becomes a whole lot more creepy. At one point during filming, there was also an actual dead body that washed up near the filming, set in the boathouse in the backyard of the house. Actors and crew members always suspected that there was an otherworldly presence during the filming of the movie. Whether they were right or just overly paranoid, nobody knows. The 2012 film The Possession is an unconventional horror movie that involves rabbis, Judaism, and a cursed Jewish relic called a dybbuk box that attaches itself to a young girl. A dybbuk box is a wine cabinet claimed to be haunted by a dybbuk, which is a malevolent wandering spirit that enters and possesses the body of a living person until exorcised. What happened on the set of The Possession left even the star of the movie, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, feeling very uneasy, and he already had a lot of experience acting in horror movies and shows under his belt. Some of the seemingly supernatural things that happened included lights exploding for no apparent reason, as well as chilly breezes wafting through closed sets for no particular reason. But the scariest incident occurred when the storage facility where all the movie props were being held caught fire and burned to the ground. A team of investigators concluded that the fire was not started from an electrical fault or arson, but the actual cause for the fire could not be determined. The dybbuk box used in the movie, which played an important role in the story, was completely destroyed in the fire. The cast and crew later refused to allow the movie's producers to replace the dybbuk box, for fear that it was truly cursed. The Conjuring is a movie that is supposed to be based on the true story of the Perron family, who claim to be tormented by supernatural entities in their Rhode Island home in the 70s. While several of the family members spent time on the set during filming, the mother refused to go anywhere near it, as she was convinced that several unexplained events that plagued the filming of this movie on set were proof that the spirits had not finished with them yet. For instance, when members of the Perron family were visiting, a furious gust of wind suddenly rose and seemed to swirl around them. However, nobody could see any movement in any of the trees just opposite them, movement you would expect to see from any normal gust of wind. Just a couple of days later, the hotel that the actors and movie crew were staying in caught fire, and everyone had to be evacuated. And it does not end there. James Wan, the movie's director, recalls working late in his office one evening when his dog started growling at something. He would get up to investigate, but he could not find anything that would be antagonizing the dog. However, the dog had his sights on something across the room, and it seemed he had focused on an unseen entity in one corner of the room. James took a break from working after this. Having been legitimately freaked out, Vera Farmiga, who played the role of a paranormal investigator in the film, refused to take the script home with her, as she said it made her feel uneasy. She also could not read it at night because she became paralyzed by fear whenever she tried. After a phone call discussion with James Wan, Vera opened her laptop screen, and there were 3 digital claw marks running from the upper right diagonal to the lower left. This was not the last time it happened, though. Her next experience came a few months later, literally on the day that she completed work on the movie. She returned home to upstate New York, and when she woke up the next day, she discovered what she describes as 3 claw mark bruises across her thigh. In 1983, a movie based on the Twilight Zone series was released. During filming, actor Vic Morrow was killed on the set. Deaths on movie sets have happened many times, but what makes this extra disturbing is the fact that Morrow appeared to predict his demise just a year earlier. A year before filming of the Twilight Zone movie began, Vic took out a $5 million life insurance policy on himself, explaining to friends and family members that he had a premonition. Something bad was going to happen to him on an upcoming movie. He had seen it in a dream he had. Unfortunately, his premonition came true. While filming a scene involving a helicopter, the aircraft crashed and decapitated him. 2 child actors were also killed, prompting a lengthy investigation and court case. In court, they revealed that the movie's concept artist had unintentionally drawn an identical image in his sketches, showing a burned-out helicopter in a river, essentially foreshadowing the accident. This led to civil and criminal action against the filmmakers for nearly a decade. One father testified he heard John Landis, the director, instructing the pilot to fly lower. The parents testified they were never told about helicopters or explosives, being assured there would only be noise. Ultimately, Landis and 4 crew members were found not guilty of manslaughter, marking the first time a director faced charges for a set fatality. The 1976 film The Omen is another classic about a young boy named Damien Thorne, who is replaced at birth by his father after their biological child dies. As violent deaths occur and Damien grows, they learn he is the Antichrist. The film was almost shut down due to an alleged curse. So many horrible things happened on set that they rivaled the movie itself. The tragedies began when lead actor Gregory Peck's son took his own life as filming started. Next, a crew member was severely injured in a car crash on his way to the set. But the tragedies did not stop there. The scriptwriter's airplane was struck by lightning en route to the film's location, and if that were not enough, an airplane in which Gregory Peck and the movie's executive producer were traveling in was also struck by lightning in a separate incident. Harvey Bernhard, the producer, was on location in Rome when he was almost hit by a bolt of lightning himself. And believe it or not, the horrible luck involving airplanes continued, and it got much worse. One day, the crew had decided to use a private airplane to get from one film location to another. However, just after the plane took off with a number of the crew on board, something went wrong, and the plane went down, crashing into a road and hitting a car, which then crashed at a high speed into another vehicle. All 11 people involved in the accident were killed. Another tragic death was that of Liz Moore. John Richardson, the special effects expert, was driving through the Netherlands with Moore when they had a terrible car accident. Richardson escaped with minor injuries, but Moore was decapitated when a tire smashed into their vehicle. This was eerily reminiscent of a scene in the film, where a character investigating Damien's origins is decapitated by a sheet of glass. Richardson later reported that right before the crash, he passed a road sign that read Omen 66.6 kilometers. Whether it was a curse or an outrageous coincidence, there is no denying the creepy connection. All that can be said for sure is that these films have left a lasting mark on cinema history, and the chilling tales that surround their productions have only helped to cement their dark and haunting legacy. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. It was the late 2000s, and I was just a regular 14-year-old kid trying to survive my 8th grade year. This was the final stretch of middle school, a time when you feel like you are finally starting to grow up, but you are still very much a kid. On this particular day, I was sitting in my afternoon math class, completely bored. The teacher was droning on about algebra and I just could not focus. I really had to use the bathroom, so I raised my hand and asked to leave. The teacher gave me the hall pass, which back then was just this big clunky wooden plank. I took the wooden plank and walked out into the quiet hallway. As I walked down the main floor, I made my way toward the nearest bathroom, but I saw a bright sign taped to it saying out of order, "Please use the upstairs or downstairs restroom." Just as I turned around, a random older man walked up to me and asked with a friendly smile on his face if I knew where the nearest bathroom was. I told him he could use either the upstairs or downstairs one. He thanked me and walked to the stairs. To avoid any more potential conversation with him, I decided to go down to the lower level. I wondered who he could be, definitely not staff, maybe just a parent. The lower level was dead quiet, containing only 4 bathrooms and extra locker rooms for sports teams. I opened the door to the bathroom, and the light was off as usual since it was the least used one. I went into a stall, shut the door, covered the seat with paper, and sat down. Suddenly, there was a white light flashing in the bathroom, and I heard the high-pitched sound of the fire alarm outside. There was a fire drill. My heart dropped because I did not know what to do. It was the first fire drill of the school year. I wondered if I would get in trouble for just staying in the bathroom while everyone else was outside. At this point, I figured I would just stay put and do my business. The flashing light got a bit annoying, as did the alarm noise coming from the hallway, but then the sound of the alarm got much louder. I realized it was because the bathroom door had opened. Then over came marching somebody right to my stall door. I saw their feet underneath the stall gap. I thought for sure it was a teacher coming to check the room for any left-behind students. But they did not say anything at all. I did not know if I should speak up. I looked down at their shoes, which were just facing my door, but I noticed they were not just standing there. I looked through that dreaded 1-inch crack of the stall door that everybody hates. I saw someone's face pressed up against it. Most apparently, the man's eye was open as wide as possible, staring directly at me. Then there was a quiet chuckle from the other side. My breathing got heavy and my heart was racing. I did not know if I should scream. Then the person got on his knees and stuck his head underneath the stall to look at me. It was that same man from the hallway. When he saw it was me, he literally crawled under the door into the stall and grabbed a hold of me. The man covered my mouth instantly. The first thing I remember him saying was to not struggle and to just relax. I did not know what he was going to do to me. It was an unreal feeling, like my life was flashing before my eyes at such a young age. Then, the fire alarm got louder again as the bathroom door opened. It was the principal's voice echoing through the room, asking if anybody was in there. I screamed as hard as I could, and though my voice was muffled through the man's tight hand, the principal heard it. He came rushing over to the stall, screaming to open the door. The man let go of me, threw the stall door open right in the principal's face, and ran for it. The principal was a very old man, so he did not chase after him. The school also did not have any security cameras at this point, so as far as I know, the guy got away. The principal actually hugged me, and he was very emotional. He told me to come with him to the office so we could call my parents. All my friends saw me almost in tears walking with my parents to their car in the middle of the schoolyard. It was humiliating, but I was also just happy to be safe. The principal had actually seen the man pull the fire alarm and run downstairs, which is why he slowly but surely made his way down there to check the bathroom first. He unfortunately passed away 5 years ago, and I still have great appreciation for him. He was my hero. Fast forward to high school. Fire drills were usually a lot of fun back then, depending on what class you were in and which friends you were with. One particular dark and cloudy day during 3rd period, my friends and I heard through the grapevine that there was going to be a fire drill. It was a Friday close to the end of the school year, and there was really no work left for us in our classes. so we figured that during the fire drill we would sneak down to the sump behind the school by the woods to smoke. We waited anxiously for that ear-piercing ringing to go off, and when it did, it was music to our ears. We looked at each other and laughed. We were the first ones out of the classroom and down the hall. While everyone else on our side of the school was headed to the front entrance, we were on our way to the back exit by the woods. We walked out in the middle of the crowd to the back section of the school near the basketball and tennis courts. We were pretty strategic about our escape. We made sure there were no teachers in sight, and then we crossed through a narrow opening between the tennis courts and a line of thick bushes that led straight to the sump. A couple of kids watched us leave, and they probably thought we were a bunch of weirdos, but it did not matter to us. We made it to the sump, which was literally a giant hole in the ground surrounded by bushes and trees right at the edge of the dark woods. The sump had a specific nickname among the students, but I do not remember what it was. All I know is that it was the place where everyone came to drink, smoke, and hang out at night. Kids even had bonfires there on the weekends. On this day, it was incredibly dark. The clouds were a darkish gray, giving the morning an early night kind of feeling. The cool breeze eerily hinted at a storm approaching, which honestly just made the whole escape feel more fun. We waited until all the commotion up the hill quieted down, assuming everyone had gone back inside the building. Then we started talking and laughing. My friend went through his backpack to get out his pipe and grinder. That was when I noticed something strange in the distance by the edge of the woods. It looked kind of like a person's face. A couple of low shrubs covered where the body would be, but what I saw just looked too much like a face. I looked away for a split second to get my friend's attention, and then I pointed in that direction. But when I looked back, the face was completely gone. They thought I was an idiot, but now that it was gone, I was about 70% sure what I had seen was a real person. The other 30% of me wondered if I was just imagining things in the dark. They did not want to move though, so I stayed put. We smoked, and the higher I got, the more paranoid I became. I never really enjoyed smoking too much for that reason, but I went along with it because it was what my group did. Now that I was high, all I could think about was that face in the woods. Did someone see us? And were we going to get in trouble? That was all that occupied my mind. Suddenly, my friends wanted to walk through the woods to an old shack that used to be used by the school for storage. It was about a minute walk into the thick woods. I was incredibly uncomfortable with the idea. The air started to feel very moist, and I started to feel those tiny pre-storm rain droplets hitting my face. Once again, I warned them that we should go back because of the approaching storm, but they ignored me. On the way there, I swore I could hear footsteps that were not ours. But honestly, I was so high that I did not even know where I was hearing them from. Were they in front of us, behind us, to the left, or to the right? I had no idea. Then, from behind us, I was absolutely sure I heard a big stick snap in half. I stopped and turned around, loudly asking what that was. My friends stopped too, but they had not heard a thing. There was nobody visible behind us, and once again, they thought I was losing my mind. I became the blunt of all their jokes as we kept walking. The big old shack finally came into view. It was bigger than I remembered, and it looked incredibly creepy. The school had stopped using this building years ago, probably because it looked like it was about to collapse. Even the path leading to the front door had tall grass growing through the cracks. The front door was wedged open. Surely, other students came in there all the time. My friend Jack pushed the door fully open with force. It was so dark inside. There was very little light from outside to begin with. It seemed like there was just a bunch of old empty crates, many of them smashed to pieces. There was also a nasty, rotting smell in the air, one that my friends did not remember from the last time they were in there. Suddenly, the sound of something squishy plopping on the ground, followed by a heavy foot hitting the wood floor, made us all jump. In the corner of the room was the shadow outline of a really tall person. We could only see him due to the tiny amount of light sneaking in through the dusty window. We did not scream or anything. We simply turned around, walked out the door the way we came, and walked quickly back in the direction of the school. All three of us took a look back at the window nearest to where the person had been standing. I swear to God, at that exact moment, the first flash of lightning struck the sky. What we saw during that flash was nothing short of horrifying. There was a guy with a seriously deformed face standing at the window. Half of his face seemed to be drooping down, and you could not even see one of his eyes. He was so close to the glass that his face was practically pressed up against it. I started running, and my friends followed right behind me. We got back down to the sump in less than a minute as the rain started to fall. Just then, my friend Jack pointed up the hill back toward the woods. There was a person standing behind a shrub, exposing only his face, just like what I had seen before. This time he was 10 times closer, but still not close enough to describe his features. All I know is that it was not the same deformed person from the shack. We ran back to the school and hid by the back entrance where it was dry. We all agreed to just go home, forget about what just happened, and never speak of that shack again. And that was exactly what we did. But our school had another secret. There was a door that led down to a half stairway to some weird dark hallway. A lot of students knew about it, but nobody really knew what was down there. The door only seemed to be unlocked during fire drills, when every door in the building opens for safety. My friend Kyle and I were particularly interested in finding out what was down there. I was a pretty bad student in my first 2 years of high school, so planning to venture down there during a fire drill was typical for us. Luckily, it happened during study hall. As the alarm rang, Kyle and I ran to one of the bathrooms, which had its door wedged open. We hid in the stalls until the hallway was clear and everyone was outside. Then, getting down those basement stairs was easy. There was a very dim light hanging from the ceiling, giving just enough light to see a doorway that led to another half flight of stairs in complete darkness. We used our phone screens to navigate the dark. We found a door marked "Do Not Enter" and pushed it open. Inside was a tiny room. We heard a clicking sound and human groans coming from a floor vent. I knelt down and pressed my ear to the metal grate to listen. Suddenly, a cold hand reached out and grabbed my ear. I screamed, and Kyle pulled the hand off. We ran out in terror. The next day, the janitor told us that room had been locked for years and the vent was sealed. We had no idea who was hiding in that shaft. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time. See ya. 5 years ago, I got out of an incredibly serious relationship. I had been with this girl for almost a decade of my life. We actually started dating all the way back in high school, stayed together through our college years, and even continued living together well beyond that. I feel like high school sweethearts rarely ever work out in the end, and unfortunately we were no exception to that rule. We grew apart, and eventually we decided to call it quits. For the first time in a very long time, I was going to try dating again. The problem was that I had absolutely no idea how to even date as an adult. When you have been with the same person since you were 16, you miss out on all the typical dating milestones. So, I did what a lot of people do in that situation, and I downloaded a few different dating apps on my phone. I went on a few dates with a few different women over the next few weeks, but honestly, they went absolutely nowhere. It was just awkward small talk and no real connection. But all of that changed when I matched with JoJo. Her real name was Josefina, but she absolutely hated it, so she went by JoJo. We started talking, and we immediately hit it off. We decided to take things really slow, because we had both just gotten out of very long-term relationships, and neither of us wanted to rush into anything serious. It felt really nice to find someone who understood that exact pace. But then, not very long into our brand new relationship, JoJo started asking me to sleep over at her place. At first, I turned down the invitation. I really liked taking things slow, and sleeping over at someone's house felt like a huge step for me at that point in my life. But she did not stop asking. In fact, she kept asking me, almost every single day, if I would please come sleep over at her apartment. She even went as far as telling me that I could take the living room couch if I was uncomfortable sleeping in her bed. She just really wanted me to be there. I finally decided to ask her why she wanted me to stay over so badly. When I asked, she got really quiet and she almost looked embarrassed. She said she did not want to tell me the actual reason, but it would mean the absolute world to her if I just agreed to stay. I told her I would stay, but only if she told me the real reason why she was so anxious. I promised her that I would not judge her for whatever it was. It was a promise that I was about to break in about 2 minutes. She went on to tell me that for the last few weeks, she had not been able to sleep well at all. She said she would wake up in the middle of the night, and she would swear that she could see someone standing in the very corner of her bedroom. She told me she originally thought it was just shadows. We all know that the darkness has a way of playing tricks on your eyes, especially when you are half asleep. But the problem was, when she would wake up in the morning, that corner with the shadow was completely empty. There was nothing around the room, no furniture, no clothes, and no coat racks that could make a person-shaped shadow in that specific spot. Over the next few weeks, she said she had become even more scared. She said it got so bad that she could not even get out of her bed if she wanted to, almost like she was frozen with fear. She decided to try sleeping on the couch one night to see if that helped her feel any safer. But when she woke up in the middle of the night on the couch, she saw the exact same shadow figure standing right in the doorway of the living room. At this point, she was convinced she was losing her mind. The night before she decided to tell me all of this, she said she actually threw a stuffed animal at the shadow just to prove to herself that she was not crazy. But instead of the stuffed animal just hitting the wall like you would expect, she said it hit the shadow, and the shadow figure actually moved slightly. Part of me felt really bad for her. She was practically in tears when she was telling me all of this. But I was not lying when I said I was about to break my promise of not judging her. I have this really bad habit of turning things into jokes during serious moments just to cope with my own awkward emotions. And in this situation, my humor failed completely. I smiled at her and told her that it had to be the monster under her bed. She got even more upset by that comment. She told me that this was the exact reason she did not want to tell me in the first place, because she knew I would think she was crazy. I quickly tried to walk it back. I told her I did not think she was crazy at all, and that there was most definitely some kind of rational explanation for what she was experiencing. I suggested that maybe it was some type of sleep paralysis. I remembered hearing stories about people seeing these dark shadow entities when they had sleep paralysis, but she was absolutely convinced that it was not that. I then told her she should try sleeping with the light on. I figured if the light in the room was super bright, then no shadow monsters could possibly form. But she told me she had already tried that. She said instead of seeing a shadow in the corner of her room with the lights on, the closet door cracked open all on its own, and the shadow was standing inside the dark closet. I hate to say this and sound like an insensitive jerk, but at that point, I was really starting to think that JoJo was a little bit crazy. It was not that I did not believe she was scared. It was just that I did not believe she was actually seeing a shadow monster or some kind of supernatural entity. In my opinion, there is always a logical, rational explanation for the unexplainable. In an effort to do some quick damage control for my stupid monster under the bed comment, I agreed to stay over at her place that night. It was around 8 o'clock that evening, and we were sitting on her couch. She was already falling asleep during the movie we were watching. She was just completely exhausted from not sleeping well for the last few weeks. I remember having a fleeting thought that maybe JoJo was just hallucinating all of this from a severe lack of sleep. I decided not to wake her up since she looked so comfortable. She was dead asleep, fully extended on the couch, and I was sitting upright next to her head, just playing with her hair. A few hours had passed, and I finally started getting really tired myself. I turned the television off, and I tried to get as comfortable as I could while sitting in that upright position on the couch. Eventually, I fell asleep too. I do not recall the exact time, but JoJo woke me up at some point during the middle of the night. She looked absolutely terrified. She whispered to me and told me to look in the doorway at the far side of the room. I squinted my eyes in the dark, and I had to admit, even though it was nearly pitch black in the apartment, I did see a strange shadow in the doorway that did not make a lot of sense. I tried to get up to go investigate, but she immediately grabbed my arm with a tight grip and begged me to stay right where I was. I started to shout at the shadow. I felt completely crazy doing it. It literally felt like I was just yelling at the dark. She was crying next to me, and she whispered that because I could also see the shadow, it must be some kind of supernatural entity. She said that part of her was just hoping that she was crazy and seeing things, but now she knew it was real. I told her it was not an entity, and if she would just let me get up to investigate, I could prove to her that it was nothing. But she still held me down, gripping my arm tightly. I asked her what usually happens next, and she said nothing happens. It just stands there and stares at her. I was being really ignorant at the time, because this whole situation just seemed so ridiculous to me. I thought to myself, if whatever this thing is actually real, but it never moves or attacks, then who cares? I decided I was going to pick up one of the throw pillows on the couch next to me and throw it right at the shadow in the doorway. My logic was that if it is truly just a shadow in the doorway, this pillow will go right through it and hit the floor behind it. Just as I was about to throw the pillow, JoJo stopped me. She reminded me that she had already thrown something at it before, and the shadow had moved. She did not want it to move again. I told her I needed to see it for myself. I grabbed the pillow, and I threw it as hard as I could right at the doorway. I fully expected to see the pillow continue to sail right through the shadowy doorframe. Instead, I heard a loud thud, and I watched the pillow hit something solid and fall to the ground. Then, whatever shadow was standing in that doorway slowly disappeared into the dark room behind the doorway. I sat up quickly now, and for the first time that night, I was on high alert. I could not explain what I had just witnessed. JoJo was hysterical on the couch. She was crying and screaming that something was not right. Even though she tried to continue holding me down, I broke free, got up, and made my way toward the doorway. She was screaming at this point, begging me to come back to the couch. When I got to the doorway, I did not enter the room right away. I stopped because I heard something. It was a faint whisper coming from the dark room. I tried to listen closely to hear what it was saying, but I could not make out any actual words. I just knew it was definitely the sound of a human whisper. As I tried to take a step into the dark room, the door suddenly slammed shut right in my face, causing me to fall back onto the floor. I heard JoJo scream in absolute terror behind me. I scrambled back to my feet and tried to open the door, but it was locked. I could hear the sound of things moving and breaking on the other side of the door. It literally sounded like a whirlwind was set loose in there. And then suddenly, everything went completely quiet. I left the door and turned on the main living room light. I went over to my bag, which was sitting next to the couch, and I grabbed my keys. I had one of those small tools on my keychain that you can use to pick a simple lock. I went back to the door, successfully picked the lock, and pushed the door open into the room. I turned on the light. The room was an absolute mess. JoJo had been using this room as her home office. It had a desk, a computer, a bookcase, and a bunch of books and paperwork. The furniture was turned over, and all the books and papers were scattered everywhere across the floor. It really looked like a tornado had been set loose in that room. But there were two things I noticed right away. First, the window in that room was wide open, and the screen had been completely removed. And second, and most importantly, there was no shadowy figure anywhere to be seen. I could hear JoJo yelling from the couch, asking me if I was okay. I came out of the room and told her that everything was okay, but that the room was a mess. I suggested that we call the police right away, but she claimed that calling them would not do anything. She insisted that it was some kind of paranormal entity. I was not sure what it was anymore. I was really freaked out in the moment, but now that it was gone, I had calmed down a bit and was trying to find a rational solution. I did not call the police, and I helped JoJo clean up the room. She stayed at my apartment for a few nights after that very eventful sleepover. When we finally went back to her place, I agreed to stay over again, and we did not see any shadow figure. When she finally stayed home alone for the first time after that, she said she slept through the night without any encounters at all. It has been 5 years since that night, and I am actually engaged to JoJo now. We still clash heads with each other whenever we talk about that night. She is still absolutely convinced that it was a supernatural entity, and I am still convinced that it was not. But the one thing we do agree on is that whatever it was definitely there. I witnessed it with my own eyes and my own ears. I often think to myself, what would actually be scarier, if a shadow monster was living in her place, or if a real physical person was just hiding in her apartment and watching her sleep every single night? Either way, I am just incredibly happy that it never happened again. At least, not yet. Now that story is terrifying because of what it suggests about the people who might be sneaking into our homes and watching us. But sometimes the threat does not sneak in. Sometimes it stands right on your front porch, looks you in the eye, and makes itself known. When I was in high school, I was not exactly a popular kid. I was not bullied or anything like that. I just was not the kid who was invited to every single party on the weekend. And honestly, that was perfectly okay with me. My parents were very strict. They were so strict that it reached a level of constant annoyance for me. I was rarely allowed to do anything outside of school, so not being invited to parties and other gatherings actually worked out in my favor because I did not have to constantly ask and get rejected by my parents. All through high school, I basically had only one friend, a guy named Evan. His parents were actually even more strict than mine were. Whenever I was allowed to do anything at all on the weekends, it was only if I was doing it with Evan. One weekend during our senior year, my parents were planning to go out of town. Even though I was 18 years old at that point, my parents still did not want me to stay home alone. This seemed completely ridiculous to me, but every parenting style is different, and I had to respect their rules. I begged them for weeks leading up to their trip to just let me stay at home alone. I told them that I would invite Evan to sleep over so that I would not technically be alone. And I promised them we would just stay inside and play video games the entire weekend. I realized that for some teenagers, this would be the perfect setup for the classic, cliché high school party, but that was not us. I was 100% serious about my plan to just stay in and play PlayStation all weekend. My parents finally agreed, and for the first time in my life, I felt a minor shred of true independence. This is where my story is about to take a very dark turn. The weekend finally arrived, and Evan came over to my house on Friday as planned. Friday night, we ordered a bunch of pizza and wings, and we started playing Kingdom Hearts 2. This was a highly nostalgic game for both of us, and we were having a great time. I do not recall the exact time, but it was very late into the night when the front doorbell suddenly rang. It scared both of us. When you are not expecting the doorbell to ring, especially late into the night, it is going to scare you. We did not answer it right away. Evan whispered that it might have just been a mistake or some kids playing a prank, and he suggested we should probably just ignore it. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang again. He tried to hold me back, but I told him I needed to answer it, just in case something bad had happened to my parents while they were traveling. I walked slowly toward the front door. During my slow crawl to the door, the bell rang for a third time. After 3 rings, I knew this was not a mistake. Somebody had to be standing out there. My heart was racing as I approached. I opened the heavy wooden front door, knowing that the outer screen door was still locked. Once I opened the door completely, I was shocked to find absolutely nobody standing there. I looked out through the screen window on the door, and from my vantage point, I did not see anyone walking down the street or running off the property. I heard Evan shout from the living room, asking who was at the door, but I did not answer him right away. I thought about going out front and looking around the yard, but my naturally scared nature got the better of me. I closed the door, went back to the living room, and told Evan it had to be a mistake. I told him nobody was out there. Obviously, we were both on edge for the rest of that night. That may make it seem like we were being cowards, but if it happened to you in a quiet house late at night, I bet you would feel a little off too. Neither one of us got a good night of sleep. We both went in and out of sleep, and every single noise inside and outside the house made us jump. Morning came, and we went outside for a while to clear our heads. We sat out on the porch and talked for hours. Eventually the sun was shining, and I had forgotten all about the weird doorbell incident from the night before. That night, we had some leftover pizza and we continued playing our video games. At exactly 1:13 in the morning, my doorbell rang again. This time, I immediately looked at the clock. I knew this was not a coincidence anymore. I felt absolutely terrified, but I still got up and approached the door. The doorbell rang again just as I forcibly opened the heavy wooden door. This time, standing behind the locked screen door was an elderly woman. She was a very short woman with white hair and heavily wrinkled skin. She was wearing a long, heavy coat, even though it was almost 70 degrees outside that night. She also had one of those scarf things tied in her hair. I had never really thought of an old woman as being unsettling, but standing on my doorstep at this hour, she made me think twice about that. Neither one of us said anything for a few seconds. She just stood there with a very weird wide smile on her face. Finally, she spoke. She asked me if Mr. Walker was home. I paused for a second, just because I was still processing everything that was happening. Then I told her that nobody by that name lives here. Her smile slowly faded when I said that. Then, she sort of made a low noise that sounded sympathetic, like she was feeling bad for me. But then she smiled big again and said, "Oh yes, that is right, Mr. Walker does not live here anymore." I forced a fake smile and told her to have a good night. But before I could close the door all the way, she spoke up again. She asked if Joe was still around. I told her she had the wrong house and that I would really appreciate it if she would just leave our property. She started to laugh. It was a high-pitched, creepy laugh. She said that Joe was still inside the house. When I asked her what she meant by that, she just continued laughing and told me that she could hear him inside right now. I said okay, and I slammed the heavy wooden door shut. As I walked away from the door, I could still hear her laughing loudly outside on the porch. Evan started to question what had happened, and I told him to be ready to call the police just in case this woman, who was clearly insane, decided she did not want to leave. A few minutes later, I looked out one of the front windows, and I saw her standing right in the middle of the street, facing my house. It was dark and kind of hard to see her clearly, but I was pretty sure she was still smiling. We contemplated calling the police right then, but I was a teenager, and I did not know what type of issues that would potentially raise with my parents. If this happened to me today, I would have called the police right away. But as a sheltered teenager, I just could not bring myself to do it. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I looked out the window again, and she was still standing in the exact same spot in the middle of the road. For almost 2 hours, she had just stood out there staring. I decided at that point that I had finally had enough. I was either going to yell through the screen door for her to go away, or I was going to call the cops. As I opened the wooden door, I did not even have time to shout at her, because the moment the door cracked open, she started to sprint at my front door at a shocking speed. This woman was very old, and I have absolutely no idea how she was physically able to move that fast. I cannot even begin to describe how terrifying it is to see someone that old move with that kind of athletic speed. It seemed completely unnatural. Before she could reach the house, I slammed the front door shut and screamed at the top of my lungs. Evan came running over to the front door to see what was going on. Before I could even explain, I saw Evan stop and stand there like a statue. He stuttered, but eventually got the words out of his mouth. He said, "The window." I looked back at the glass window next to the front door, and looking right through the glass was the old woman, smiling. She was bending her body sideways in an almost unnatural, twisted way to look in. I immediately grabbed the house phone and called the police. For a few minutes the woman stood in that exact spot, staring through the glass and not moving a single muscle. A couple of minutes before the squad car finally arrived, she turned and left. I could tell the police officer was very apprehensive about everything we told him when he arrived. At the end of the day, we were just a couple of high school kids, telling a crazy story about an unnaturally fast and athletic elderly woman. I probably would not have believed us either. He took our statements and he left. In case it was not obvious already, we did not sleep at all that night. I fully expected her to show up again as soon as the police officer left, but thankfully she never came back. My parents came home late on Monday morning. I was not going to tell them what had happened, but eventually I caved in. I did not like lying to my parents, and not telling them that I had called the police made me feel like I was keeping something massive from them. So, I told them everything. I told them about the doorbell on Friday night, and then the old lady showing up on Saturday night. As I told them the story, both of my parents looked physically sick, but not for the reason I thought they would. They did not seem to be concerned about the old woman terrorizing us from the street. They were more afraid of what she had actually said when she initially showed up at the door, specifically when she asked about Mr. Walker and Joe. I had just assumed that these were just random names that this crazy old woman had mentioned, but as it turned out, the truth was much darker. She had asked if Joe was still around, and then claimed he was still inside the house. Well, my parents decided to finally tell me that when they bought the house when I was 5 years old, they got an unbelievably great deal on it because the previous owner, a man named Joe, had murdered his wife and then killed himself inside the house. His name was Joe. I could not believe what I was hearing. I was absolutely terrified. This woman had said she could still hear him inside. I tried to calm myself down by telling myself that this woman must have simply known Joe when he lived there years ago. I wish that was where the story ended, but things were about to get even more disturbing. While I was sitting there trying to process the awful news about Joe, my dad told me there was more. He explained that the reason we had moved out of our very first house when I was 5 years old was because a man who called himself Mr. Walker would terrorize our family and stalk our house. He would call our phone at all hours of the night, threatening my dad, and he would even show up on our doorstep and continuously try to break in. My parents had called the police many times back then, but the police could never catch him or do anything about it. This went on for months. My dad, who used to hunt, eventually got his rifles out and would stay up all night, trying to catch Mr. Walker in the act. One night, Mr. Walker successfully broke into our old house, and my dad took a shot at him in the dark. He did not know if he missed him completely or if he hit him in the shoulder, but the intruder ran away. My dad never saw him again. We moved away to this new house a few weeks later, and after that terrifying ordeal is when my parents became so strict with me. It took me a long time to process everything my parents had told me that day. I was angry that they had never told me about any of this before, but I understood why they wanted to protect me. But after all this time, I am still left scratching my head. We still have absolutely no idea who that old woman was, or how she knew so much about our family's past, especially about Mr. Walker from our old house. That night with Evan happened 16 years ago now. During all that time, the woman never came back. I do not live at home with my parents anymore, but whenever I go back to visit them, I find myself looking out that front window, just wondering where that old woman went and what she actually wanted. Maybe my parents' houses were cursed, or maybe we were being watched by someone who knew all of our secrets. I do not know. I just hope all the dark clouds that followed us for all those years have finally gone away for good. Now, those stories are terrifying because they involve real people invading our safe spaces. But this next story is not your typical scary story that you hear every day. There are no ghosts or demons or creepy stalkers in this one, just the potential confirmation that real monsters do exist in this world, and they can literally live right next door to you without you ever knowing it. For the majority of my life, I never really thought of this next story as being scary. I just thought of it as weird, and maybe slightly unnerving, but not truly terrifying. I have told it to people for years now, and whenever I do, those people are always completely freaked out by it. It was only recently that I started to think about this story differently, and now I think it is absolutely horrifying. I do not know exactly how old I was when this happened, but I was in the 5th grade, so I was likely around 10 years old. I had a lot of friends both in and outside of school. My parents would always call me a social butterfly because I could talk to anyone. In the middle of that school year, we got a brand new student in our class. His name was Alfred. Alfred was a little bit awkward, to say the least. It is always hard being the new kid in school, and it is even harder to be the new kid halfway through the school year when everyone has already formed their friendship groups. I remember some of my friends immediately making fun of him because of his name. They started calling him the Butler because Alfred is the name of Batman's butler in the comic books. Then, after a while, that nickname got shortened to just the Butt. You can imagine how much a bunch of 5th graders loved using that name. Even all the girls in our class started calling him that. I felt really bad for him, but it did not really look like it bothered Alfred all that much. He just took the verbal abuse as it came and went about his daily life. I think the main reason I had a soft spot for Alfred was because his family had moved into the house that was directly next door to mine. Because we lived next door, we rode the school bus together every day, and we walked home from the bus stop together. I realized during those short walks home that he and I actually had a lot in common that my other friends did not like. Specifically, we both absolutely loved professional wrestling. My other friends at school hated professional wrestling with a passion. It is just one of those things that you either love or you hate. I feel like there really is not much middle ground when it comes to wrestling. We bonded over this shared interest for a couple of months, but we never actually hung out outside of school hours. Even in school, our conversations were always very brief. I sat with my other friends at lunch, and they flat out refused to let Alfred sit with us at our table. Kids can be incredibly ruthless, but Alfred did not seem to care. He would just sit by himself. One Friday afternoon when I got home from school, My mom was on the phone in the kitchen. She was using her classic friendly mom voice. When she hung up the phone, she turned to me and told me she had been talking to Alfred's mom. His mom had apparently told my mom that Alfred had been really struggling to adjust to his new school, and she believed it was because mostly everyone was mean to him, except for me. She asked my mom if I could come over to their house for a sleepover that night. I liked the kid fine, but I honestly did not want to sleep over at his house. I knew my other friends would absolutely kill me and make fun of me if they ever found out. But my mom, being the extremely nice woman she is, had already told Alfred's mom that I would love to stay over. I did not bother trying to fight with my mom about it, because I knew this would be an argument that I would easily lose. I figured I could just talk about wrestling with him all night, and I would make the absolute best of the situation. I walked over to his house in the late afternoon. His parents were actually super nice to me. His dad was wearing a professional wrestling shirt and was very outgoing. He was doing a bunch of funny wrestler impressions and started talking to me about all the classic wrestling matches. I was honestly having a really good time. As it started to get late, his parents told us that they were going to bed upstairs. They said we could stay up as late as we wanted, as long as we kept our voices down and did not go down into the basement. After his parents went upstairs, I asked Alfred why we were not allowed to go into the basement. He looked at me and told me that his dad had a lot of stuff down there for his job that was dangerous. He said it was just best for us to avoid going down there, so we did not accidentally get hurt. I thought that was a little bit weird, but I just shrugged it off and we went back to playing. We hung out for a while longer, and eventually we decided to go to sleep. Well, Alfred went to sleep. I, on the other hand, could not sleep at all. I never could sleep well whenever I stayed overnight at someone else's house. I just did not sleep well when I was not in my own bed. During the middle of the night, I heard the sound of footsteps. It was Alfred's dad coming downstairs. I quickly closed my eyes and pretended like I was fast asleep. A few seconds later, I heard him walk past us and open a door in the connecting hallway. He closed the door behind him, and then I could hear the distinct sound of footsteps descending down a set of stairs. Based on where we were sleeping, I could hear this through the heating vent that was located right near my head. I did not hear anything else for a little while. I thought it was pretty weird that his dad had woken up in the middle of the night just to go down into the basement, but I did not really care that much. But then, I started to hear a very strange, muffled sound coming up through the vents. It sounded like a television playing, but it was very static and distorted. The sound was way too distorted for me to hear anything specific. It was probably close to an hour before the distorted static sound finally ended, and then I heard him coming back upstairs. He walked back through the living room, stood there for a brief moment in the dark, and then went back upstairs to his bedroom. I finally fell asleep not long after that. When I woke up in the morning, Alfred's dad was already in the kitchen making breakfast for us. He was the exact same vibrant, friendly guy that I had met yesterday afternoon. While we were eating our breakfast, he started talking about older wrestling matches from the 80s. He mentioned that he actually had a ton of rare wrestling shows that he had recorded on VHS tapes, and they were all stored in the basement. Alfred perked up when his dad said this. He turned to me and told me that I absolutely had to watch some of these matches, because they were amazing. His dad then said to me that if it was okay with my parents, I could stay over for a second night, and he would grab some of those tapes from the basement for us to watch. I said okay to the offer, because I was not planning on doing anything else that weekend anyway, and I thought it would be really cool to watch some old wrestling footage that I had never seen before. He told us he had to run out to do some errands for a few hours, but when he came back, we would watch the tapes if I was still over. I was really excited about it. I remember thinking to myself that he must have gone down into the basement last night to watch some of those old wrestling matches. That would perfectly explain the older TV static sound that I had heard coming through the vent in the middle of the night. My mom said it was fine for me to stay over again. I started talking to Alfred about some of the tapes his dad had, and Alfred was going into great detail about some awesome-sounding matches that he said I needed to see. I mentioned to Alfred that I had heard his dad go down into the basement last night, and that it sounded like he was watching something down there. Alfred seemed genuinely confused when I said this. He looked at me like he did not understand why his dad would ever go down into the basement in the middle of the night. In my attempt to snap him out of his confusion, I suggested that maybe the two of us should just go down into the basement right now and look at his dad's legendary wrestling tape collection ourselves. Alfred looked very nervous when I suggested this. He said we really should not go down there, especially without his dad being home. But being the terrible friend that I was, I told him that his dad would not even know we went down there. I said we would just go down, look at the tapes, and then be back upstairs before his dad ever got home. He was very reluctant, but he eventually agreed. I think he just wanted to be agreeable because he did not want to jeopardize our brand new friendship. We quietly snuck down into the basement. It looked like a typical old basement. It was very dark, cold, unfinished, and smelled like damp concrete. In the very back of the basement, I noticed this creepy, yellow wooden door. Painted across the door in red spray paint were the words, "Get out." When I pointed to the ominous-looking door and asked about it, Alfred said that the door was actually like that when they first moved into the house. He said his dad thought it looked cool, so he just decided to leave it there. Alfred approached the yellow door and told me that all of his dad's wrestling tapes were kept behind it. He opened the door, and inside was a small room. There was an entire wall of shelves packed with videotapes. On the opposite side of the shelves, next to the door, was an older television set with a VCR connected to it. I realized this must be the exact spot where his dad was watching tapes the night before. I started looking at all the videotapes on the shelves. Almost every single one of them was carefully labeled with a piece of tape that listed the specific wrestling event, the wrestlers involved, and the year it took place. Alfred told me his dad calls himself a tape trader. This is exactly what it sounds like. Back before the internet, wrestling fans used to trade VHS tapes through the mail to acquire rare matches and wrestling shows from other countries. I was amazed by how many tapes he had. But as I was running my fingers across one of the middle shelves, I noticed a few tapes scattered among the hundreds of labeled wrestling videos. These tapes were labeled very differently. They just said things like Wrestling Tape 1 and Wrestling Tape 2, and so on. Everything else in the room was so detailed, so it felt really weird to me that these specific tapes were labeled with such basic names. I grabbed the tape that said Wrestling Tape 2, and I made my way over to the VCR. Alfred asked me what I was doing, and I told him I just wanted to see what was on one of these random basic tapes. He told me to hurry up so we would not get in trouble if his dad came home. I inserted the tape into the VCR and turned on the TV, but instead of any wrestling match coming up on the screen, the television just showed static, grainy footage of a strange red room. Everything on the screen was solid red. There was a red wall, a red floor, and a red ceiling. The only other object in the fuzzy, grainy image was a single wooden chair sitting in the middle of the room. While the tape was playing, absolutely nothing was happening in the image on the screen. The chair just sat there, but in the background of the audio, you could hear screaming. It was the type of horrific, blood-curdling screaming that still lingers in your head decades later. Just as I was about to reach out and eject the tape, because it was making me feel sick, a man wearing a mask suddenly walked onto the screen. He spoke directly to the camera. In a disturbingly cheerful voice, he said, "Stay tuned. You will want to see what happens next." Then, he started to laugh hysterically as the screams just outside of the camera's view got even louder and more desperate. Alfred immediately reached over, stopped the VCR, and ejected the tape. He looked terrified. He said he heard a car door closing outside. We quickly turned the television off and ran upstairs as fast as our legs could carry us. Just as we got back to the living room, his dad came inside the house. He was acting goofy and cheerful, just like he had been for all of our other interactions. He told us to give him just a few minutes to wash up, and then he would go find some great wrestling matches for us to watch. His dad walked past us and went downstairs. When he did, a wave of panic hit me. I suddenly remembered that in our rush to run upstairs, I had forgotten to put the tape back on the shelf. Alfred had ejected it, but we had left it sitting on the table next to the VCR. I did not say anything to Alfred about it, because I was too scared. About an hour later, his dad came back upstairs. But he looked completely different now. He looked incredibly angry. He was not acting silly or outgoing anymore. His face was cold. He walked straight into the living room, looked directly at me, and told me that I needed to go home right now. Then he just walked away. Alfred tried asking his dad why I had to leave, but his dad did not answer. I did not ask any questions. I just grabbed my things and left. I felt so incredibly uncomfortable that I did not want to spend another second in that house. That next Monday at school, Alfred was not in class. When I got home from school that afternoon, I decided to walk over to his house next door to see if he was okay. I knocked on the door and Alfred answered it. He looked like he had been crying. I asked him if he was okay and why he was not at school. He looked back over his shoulder, and then he told me that his family was moving away immediately because his dad had just gotten a new job. I asked him again if he was truly okay since he looked so upset. After a strangely long, tense pause, he just mumbled that he was okay. Suddenly, his dad emerged from one of the dark rooms behind him. The moment his dad appeared, Alfred quickly said he had to go, and he shut the heavy front door right in my face. I thought it was incredibly weird that they were just moving away so abruptly, but I eventually went about my life as normal. I had started to enjoy hanging out with him, but at the end of the day, he was not one of my best friends, so I did not think about it constantly. Literally, the very next day, they were completely gone. The moving trucks had come and gone in the middle of the night. Our teacher made a brief announcement at school that Alfred would not be coming back. And of course, none of the other kids cared. It was years later when I brought up this story again to a bunch of my friends when we were hanging out and talking about weird childhood memories. I told them about the videotapes in the basement and the creepy Red Room footage we had watched. The moment I said that, one of my friends started completely freaking out. He began telling me about something called a Red Room, which was supposedly a highly illegal, hidden website only accessible on the dark web where people would pay to watch awful things happen to victims. I told him that this was impossible because the event happened way before high-speed internet had video streaming capabilities, since we watched it on a physical VHS tape. But my friend suggested that maybe this was some kind of early, physical form of what the online Red Rooms would eventually become. He suggested that his dad might have been producing or distributing these horrific tapes. I dismissed the theory at first because it just seemed way too ridiculous and dark to be true. I did not want to believe that my childhood neighbor's dad was a monster. But as the years passed, and I continued to tell this story to other people, more and more people started to agree with that exact theory. One time, my friends and I actually tried looking up Alfred and his parents on social media. We searched for hours, but they simply do not exist. There is no trace of them anywhere online. It is like his entire family was there next door to me, and then they completely vanished from the face of the earth. I still do not know for sure if I believe that I actually saw something that twisted and dark on that tape. I want to believe it was just some weird amateur horror movie his dad had made. But the more I read about these things as an adult, the more all of the pieces of the puzzle start to fit together. His dad's strict rule about the basement, the creepy yellow door, the muffled screaming coming through the heating vents in the middle of the night, the generic labels on the tapes, and his sudden, intense anger when he realized we had been down there. And then, of course, the fact that they packed up their entire lives and vanished into thin air the very next day. As an adult, if I think about this story for too long, I start to lose sleep. I sincerely hope with all my heart that whatever was on that tape was just a fabricated home movie. Because if it was real, and if it was an early form of something that dark, just knowing that I was that close to a real-life monster will keep me awake for years to come. It is funny how we go through life thinking we are safe in our own homes, in our own neighborhoods. We look at our neighbors, our friends, the people we date, and we think we know them. But the truth is, we only know the version of them that they choose to show us. We do not see what they do when the lights go out. We do not see what they keep hidden behind locked basement doors, or what they do when they are standing in the shadows of our bedrooms while we are fast asleep. The world is a much darker place than we like to admit. Sometimes, the things that go bump in the night are not ghosts or monsters from our imaginations. Sometimes, they are just ordinary people who have decided to let the darkness take over. And the scariest part of all is that you might be living right next door to one of them right now, and you would never even know it until it is far too late. I think about Jojo's apartment, and how close we came to finding out who was actually in that room. I think about the old woman standing in the street staring at my house, and the horrific realization that she knew the names of the people who had died there and the stalker who had tried to kill my family. And I think about Alfred, a lonely kid who just wanted a friend, and his father, who smiled and made breakfast for us, while keeping unspeakable horrors locked away in the basement. These memories do not fade. They stay with you, tucked away in the back of your mind, waiting for the room to get dark, waiting for the doorbell to ring, or waiting for a floorboard to creak. We try to find rational explanations for everything because the alternative is just too terrifying to accept. We tell ourselves that it was just a shadow, or just a crazy old woman, or just a bad movie. We do this to survive. We do this so we can close our eyes at night and actually get some sleep. But deep down in those quiet moments when we are lying awake in the dark, we know the truth. We know that the monsters are very real, and they are always waiting. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. I am not a good person. There is really no other way for me to say that. And to be honest, I am okay with that at this point in my life. I was dealt a rough hand my entire life, and unfortunately I just played the hand I was given. I am not looking for sympathy either. It is what it is. So with that being said, I hope you understand why I am telling this story anonymously. It is hard to believe now, but this story I am about to tell happened to me almost 20 years ago. Back in the early 2000s, I was the worst I had ever been. I was constantly getting into trouble. You name it. Robbery, fighting, grand theft auto. The list goes on and on. There was this one horrible night where I came awfully close to getting exactly what I deserved. Back then, there was about a 6-month period when I played this little game. I would drive to a different small town in the middle of nowhere every couple of days. Because I never stayed in one place long, finding these little towns was very easy. There is literally a countless number of small towns in the United States, and back then, without advanced GPS and tracking, it was easy to get lost in them. When I arrived in these towns, I would spend a little bit of time scouting the area and finding an old couple. My target couple would always be old and frail looking. It is hard to explain, but they would also have to seem weak. I know that seems vague, but part of my grift relied on them being mentally weak in addition to being physically weak. I needed people who were trusting, polite, and easily overwhelmed. Once I found my ideal candidate, I would wait until it got good and dark, but not too late. Usually around 9 in the evening was my go time. That is when I would frantically show up on these old people's doorsteps begging for help. I would point to my car parked down the road and claim that it had suddenly died. I would have some flimsy excuse, like my wife was in the hospital about to give birth, and I needed a phone immediately to call for help. Once the old folks would invite me inside, I would tie them up and rob them blind. I would never steal anything sentimental, and I just did my absolute best not to hurt the old people. Harming them was never part of the game. I just wanted to rob them and get out. Now that you all know how much of a trash bag of a human being that I was, I will tell you about the night when this little game almost ended my life. It started just like all the other nights. I found my targets and got ready for the robbery. I pulled my car in front of the house a little after 9 in the evening. I planned on telling the old couple my usual line about how my wife was pregnant and the car had died. Sadly, this line worked every single time. The location is extremely important in this story, so I will try to describe it the best I can. The house was basically the only house on this particular country road. I think the next closest house was about a 3-minute drive away, which is a long distance when you are in trouble. The front of the house was basically right on the road. There was not much of a driveway to speak of. They had one old pickup truck, but that was parked on the side of the house in the grass. Behind the house were woods as far as you can see, stretching out into the dark horizon. Knowing the area was an important part of my grift because if things went south, I needed to know what the best way out could be. Since this house did not really have much of a front yard or driveway, my escape plan was an easy one. At least, that is what I thought it would be. I put on my game face, ran up to the door, and started knocking and screaming for help. An old woman answered the door, but the problem was, she did not look scared or concerned in the slightest, With almost no sense of urgency, she calmly asked what the problem was. I started frantically explaining that my wife was in the hospital about to give birth to our first child and my car broke down. I told her I needed to call someone for help immediately. The woman smiled. It was a rough smile. There were not many teeth in her mouth. She grabbed my shoulder and told me to come on in. The woman's demeanor was giving me serious pause. Usually, the people I am robbing at this point are freaking out and trying to help any way they can, but not this woman. She cheerfully guided me inside and told me to stand in the living room, which was the room just to the right of the front door. In a creepy, slow voice, she told me not to worry and that I would be okay. It was right then that this giant man walked into the room. I am exaggerating a bit when I say giant, but he was absolutely huge. I would guess he was well over 6 feet tall and easily 400 pounds. He had a bushy black beard that stuck out from his face about 3 inches. But the two most notable things about this large man were that he was holding a hunting rifle in his hand, and he was not old. This man could not have been more than 25 or maybe 30 years old. Younger people were not as susceptible to my game, so this was a major oversight on my part. The woman spoke up and told me that this was her son, and he would go out and take a look at my car. Before I could even get a word out, she shouted the name Hank at the top of her lungs. She started telling me that her husband Hank is in the other room and he would for sure help me too. She continued yelling for Hank, and at the same time, her son walked outside. I started to panic a bit because her son would clearly see that my car is fine, and I did not think just rushing out was the best idea since he was walking around with that rifle in his hands. And then Hank limped into the living room where I was standing, and then he just stared at me. The old woman said something about helping me, and Hank just mumbled something under his breath. This is when I noticed the smell. Everything happened so fast once I got to the door that I did not realize the smell inside the house was bad. It was really, really bad. It was not the smell of dirty laundry or body odor. It was something else, something worse, like rotting garbage or old meat left out in the sun. And that is when I decided it is time to go. I started creeping toward the door, and I saw Hank mirroring my movements, stepping toward the exit. The old woman was also creeping closer to me and asking where I was going. She kept asking me what was wrong and asking if I still wanted their help. I made up a stupid lie and told them I needed to get something out of my car. Both of them were closing in on me. When I was about 6 feet from the front door, I made a hard move and sprinted the rest of the way. As I ran, I felt Hank attempt to grab me, but thankfully, my youth allowed me to slip away quickly. For a split second, I forgot about their son outside. That intense moment inside had my blood pumping, and leaving was the only thing on my mind. But when I got to the car, I noticed that all 4 of my tires had been completely deflated. As I ran closer and inspected the tires, I could easily tell that they were slashed. I did not know what to do or what was going on. I did not see their son, but I heard Hank yell from the house that I was outside, and that I could not have gotten far. I decided to run into the woods. I know that is like a cliché, but hiding in the cover of darkness in the woods seemed like a much better idea than running on an open road where they could easily spot me. I sprinted deep into the woods for a minute or two, and then hid behind a big tree to catch my breath. I got down to the ground and did my best to listen for footsteps. Not long after, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming toward me. I could not move, because that would clearly bring attention to my hiding spot. I was holding my breath and trying my best not to move a single muscle. The footsteps were getting louder, and they felt like they were right on top of me. I looked to my side, and just 2 feet from my head was the old couple's son walking by me, slowly swinging the hunting rifle in his hand. I think the only reason he did not hear me was because of the loud sound of his own heavy footsteps. I could feel myself shaking as he stepped right past me. Somehow he did not see me and just continued walking in the dark. I waited for him to get out of sight, and then I basically crawled out of the woods. When I got back to the house, I still snuck quietly back to my car. I could see in the windows of the house that the old woman was just standing there looking outside toward the woods. Somehow she did not see me. I did not see Hank either, which led me to believe that he must have been in the woods too. At this point, I decided to do the stupidest thing ever, and I still cannot believe it worked. I got into my car with its flat tires, started the engine, and I essentially rolled down the street as far as I could before the tires were completely dead. Once I could hear the metal rims grinding on the asphalt, I got out of my car and ran as fast as I could back to the town. It took me a while, but I made it. I eventually got someone to tow the car out of there the next day. And I did not tell them or any police about the old people. I did not want anybody to dig too deep into my own criminal life. Once I got away and got the car towed, I did not want to think about those people ever again. I do not really know for sure what those people were doing that night. I know what I felt, and I know what I saw. The strange body language, the horrific smell, the slashed tires, just everything adds up to something very bad. I found this experience to be a middle finger of karma from the universe. I did somewhat clean up my act soon after this experience, but I definitely did not become a saint. I am still a bad person from my past. I am just not as bad as I used to be, and I do feel regretful and remorseful for a lot of what I have done. Honestly, though, I think whatever those people were up to in that house was far worse than whatever I was out there doing. This brings me to another story that happened a few years later. I have never shared this story before in its entirety because I do not like the way it makes me look. Basically, I spent a little over a year being a different kind of criminal. I worked as an overnight security guard for this large strip mall in my hometown. For obvious reasons, I am not going to mention the name of my hometown, the mall, or anything else that could potentially get me in trouble. For the first few months, I took my job very seriously. Once I had the lay of the land, I realized how insanely boring my job actually was. At first, it was like a dream job. I am a night owl, so staying up all night is nothing new to me. I also do not love people, and this job had about zero human interaction. I would monitor the security cameras, make a few nightly walks around the mall, and basically listen to podcasts or watch shows on my phone all night. This honestly got old a lot quicker than I thought it would. It was the absolute boredom that got to me. I needed something to give me a little spice in my life. I had spent most of my life to this point never getting into trouble. I was not a bad kid, and for all my adult life to this point, I had never gotten as much as a traffic ticket. One night, after monitoring the cameras, I realized that one of the back doors of the stores did not have a camera anywhere near it. I do not know how that could ever happen in a modern retail space, but I was happy it did. I should explain the layout of this strip mall. Just like any other strip mall, the stores are all lined up in the front. What was cool about this mall was that behind every store was a large back room that connected every store to the security office. From the office, I had access to every store, so, even though the front door of a store would be locked, I could still gain access from the back room corridor. After discovering that back door with no camera, it got me thinking. I wondered where all the other blind spots were. I started paying closer attention to the cameras and making notes of all the blind spots I could find in every single store. When I would make my nightly walks, I would go to some of these suspected blind spots and do something stupid like a dance move. And then when I got back to the office, I would play the tape back and see if you could see me dancing. If you could not see me, then I knew the spot was blind. And I made a note in my phone of the exact location. Once I noted every blind spot, the boredom set in again. I started to think of ways I could utilize these blind spots with the back door. I started with something small. I went to one of the stores and took a hat that was on a rack in a blind spot. I opened the back door and put the hat in a box outside the door. When I left that morning, I drove around back and took the box. The next night, when I showed up, I played the tape back from when I took the hat. And when I left, there was no video at all of me. I had convinced myself that I had perfected the art of stealing just like that. And that is exactly what I did for a long time. At some point during the shift, I would just steal something because I could. Sometimes it would be something small, like a cheap t-shirt, and other times it would be something far more valuable, like an expensive pair of sneakers. I realized that these stores obviously have inventory, so I was careful and methodical with what I stole. I apologize for the long setup, but I think it is necessary to understand my job and what I was doing at this job for full context. One night while I was making my rounds, I heard something. This was the first time anything of note ever happened during my shift. The only crime that ever happened on my watch was being committed by me. The noise sounded like children laughing. I pulled out my flashlight and searched the area. I did not see anyone. I could hear the laughter all around me, and what sounded like whispers, but the whispers were incoherent. I started yelling for them to come out, but there was nothing. I could hear the movement and laughing, but I could not see anything. The worst part of all of this was that it was all around me, and I still could not see anything. I felt crazy. I shouted that I was going to call the police like the tough security guard that I was, and the laughing stopped for a second, but then it started again. I ran out of the store and back to the office. I pulled up the tape and saw nothing. All you could see in the security footage is me waving the flashlight around like an idiot and yelling at nothing. I did not call the police because my plan was to catch these kids when they tried to escape. I may know where all the blind spots are, but I knew there was no way these kids would know. I pulled up all the camera feeds for that store and watched them all night, and surprisingly, I saw nothing for the entire evening. Close to dawn, I went back to the store and walked around, and I saw no evidence of any kids or break-ins. I chalked this up to my mind playing tricks on me and just decided to move past it. I had the next 2 nights off. When I went back to work, I asked the guy who was leaving as I was punching in if anything weird had happened the last 2 nights, to which he said no. That night, I decided I was going to check out that store again and maybe help myself to a little something. When I got to the store around 3 in the morning, I made my way to the sneaker section, and as I grabbed a pair of new Vans, I heard something swoosh by me. I froze because any noise you are not expecting is alarming in this situation. I shouted, "Who is there?" but the only response I got was the taunting laughter again. I ran out of the aisle, still holding on to the Vans in my hands. Once again I was shining the flashlight all over the store, and again I did not see anything. I was shouting and moving around erratically. I was still holding the sneakers in one hand and holding the flashlight with the other. As I aggressively walked through the store, I made my way to one of the corners of the store. And then I saw something move from the corner of my eye. I looked down the aisle to my left and I shouted. I saw a small figure come out from the back of the aisle and wave at me. I tried shining my flashlight, but they were too far away. It just looked like a dark shadow. I told them to stay there, and I started to run towards them. I took my eyes off the shadow for 1 second, and they were gone. I started running around that area like a crazy person shouting, but I could not see them again. I could still hear the laughter and running all around me, though then I heard one of the voices, clear as can be, say my full name. I had about enough at that point. I wanted no part of being in the store anymore. I ran back to the security office. I did not even realize through all this confusion that I still had the Vans in my hand. I sat them down in the office and told myself I would bring them back in the morning. Right now. I just wanted to pull up the footage and catch whoever these kids were that were messing with me. I watched every second of the feed, and not once can you see anything other than me running around. I looked insane. The craziest part is that there is a camera that faces right down the aisle where I saw the kid, but on the footage you cannot see anyone. I do not know if it was just too dark or what, but there was no sign of anyone. That morning, when my supervisor showed up, I told her all about the previous night and the night from 2 days ago. She pulled up the footage and only saw me running around like an idiot. She also saw the Vans in the office and questioned why I had them in the first place. I did not have a real answer for her. I could tell she was more than suspicious of me. She told me that some of the stores had reported some theft, and that the Vans in my office and my erratic behavior did not look good. I kept trying to tell her that I was not being erratic, and that there was someone in the store. I told her that they even knew my name, and she did not believe me. She basically accused me of stealing right there, and I denied it. I quit at that moment because I felt like if I did not work there anymore, I could not get in trouble for stealing. I do not know why I thought that. They ended up doing an investigation for the theft, not the potential intruders that I reported. Somehow I did not get caught, and nobody was arrested. When I think about this experience, I think that maybe I am crazy, and that I was seeing things that were not there. I also do not have any history of seeing or hearing things like this, and I have not heard or seen anything since then. I know what I saw. I know I cannot prove it, and I know it sounds insane, but I know I saw someone standing there. I know someone was messing with me. I just cannot believe they knew my name. This brings me to another story about someone who ended up on the wrong side of things. It was sent to me by a viewer who wanted to share their own experience from the bad guy's perspective. He wrote that he would not say he was a bad person before this. He mostly kept to himself, went to class, did what he had to do, and went home. He had always been socially awkward, and he did not really have friends, but it never bothered him that much because that was normal to him in his school days. And then one day, he got paired with a girl for a presentation in one of his classes. Let's call her Emily. She was normal and easy to talk to, the kind of person who made group work enjoyable. The first time they met up in the library, they went over the outline for about an hour, but he found himself paying attention to things that had nothing to do with the project. Small things about her and the way she talked and wrote. He realized instantly that he had a thing for her. After that, they exchanged numbers to stay in touch about the presentation, and that should have been the end of it. That night, he looked her up online. It was not hard to find her after saving her number, so he could see her Snapchat profile through contacts, which is how he got her name. Within a few minutes he had her Instagram, and from there it just kept going. He thought it was harmless. He was just curious because honestly, this was the only real female interaction he had had for a long time, and he was infatuated. He scrolled through her photos. He saw where she went, who she spent time with, and he started noticing details in the background that he could kind of piece together. It turned into him checking her accounts constantly, like it had become a normal part of his daily routine. Within a few days, he had a pretty good idea of what neighborhood she lived in. He took things too far when he looked up how to find someone's address with their phone number, and he realized how easy it is. When he found it, he drove past her house once. Then he circled back and slowed down. There was a light on upstairs, and he wondered if it was her bedroom. He noticed the red car parked in front of the house, that he was pretty sure was hers, because it had a parking sticker for their college on the side window. He should have stopped there. But he got addicted to stalking this girl. It turned into something he did a couple of nights a week. He always stayed in the car and told himself he was not crossing a line, even though he clearly already had. One night, he was parked a little further down the street and noticed the blinds in the upstairs window shift a little bit. He saw someone peering out the window. He could not tell if it was her, but it was definitely someone peering out. He started freaking out, thinking she or a family member noticed him and was on to him. He left right away, perhaps making it more suspicious by speeding off, and the whole drive home he could not stop thinking about it. The next day in class, Emily acted completely normal, but at one point, she made a comment that made his heart drop. She made a subtle comment about some of the boys at the school being creepy, and that she was dealing with a stalker situation. He did not ask her to go deeper into it, because he was terrified to know if she was referring to him. After that, he stopped going near her house. He stopped checking her profile as much too. He was convinced she might have caught on, and he did not want to push it any further. Now, here is where things really started messing with his head. At this time, he was living in his grandparents' house. That house was handed down to his parents after they both passed, and he was living there alone. He was in his room at like 9 at night, and he heard something outside, like a light tap against the window. He did not mean someone ominously tapping their finger on the glass. He meant it sounded like someone brushing up against the glass, as if trying to look inside. He was too scared to go look, though. The next night, it happened again. But this time it sounded like it was coming from a different side of the house. This was when he knew it was not a coincidence, and it only got worse. He started seeing shapes through the blinds, someone standing too close to the window. It was never clear enough to see who it was, just enough to know that there was a person or multiple people circling his house. He stopped opening the blinds completely after that. He stayed in his room with the door locked and the lights off. This went on for days. He stopped going to class entirely. He barely left his room unless he absolutely had to. There was a person or group of people trying to see if he was home. He started using his limited money to have any food or necessities delivered, because he did not want to leave the safety of the house. Every sound made him feel like someone was right outside. During all of this, Emily started texting him asking if he was okay since he had not shown up to class or responded about the project. He did not answer right away, but eventually, he replied and told her he was sorry, and asked her to please stop sending people to his house. As soon as he sent it, he regretted it. Her response came a few minutes later. The typing bubble came up, then disappeared, then came up, then disappeared. He watched the whole time as she was definitely trying to figure out how to respond. When she did, she responded confused and concerned, asking what he was talking about. That was the moment it really hit him that maybe she had nothing to do with any of this. He tried to play it off like he sent that message to the wrong person, and she surprisingly did not question it after that. But the damage was already done in his head. That night was the worst it had been. It was late, and he was sitting on his bed in the dark when the doorbell rang. It came out of nowhere and made his heart jump. He lay still for a few seconds before getting up and walking downstairs with all the lights still off. Yes, he was living in darkness for days. He stood near the door without opening it, just to listen. The person on the other side must have heard him, because they asked him to open the door. Not asked, they told him to. He told them he did not order anything. The tone on the other side got more aggressive, telling him to open the door like it was not a request anymore. He did not respond. He just backed away and went upstairs as quietly as he could. Then he locked himself in his room. They spammed the doorbell for a solid minute while he was hiding in his bed like a coward. After a minute or two, they stopped. He went to stay with his parents for a few days, not telling them the reason because he did not want to explain his creepy actions. The rest of his time working with Emily in class was very awkward. He never found out if she sent her family or friends or whoever to his house. If it was not her, he did not know who it could have been. Regardless, he never went to her house again or stalked her page again. Whoever was coming to his house lost interest after he spent about 5 days at his parents' house. He got a taste of his own medicine, and he never wanted that to happen again. But that is not the only story of someone getting a taste of their own medicine. This final story comes from another person who was doing some very questionable things. 2 years ago, this narrator was what you would call lost in life. He did not have any direction. He worked dead-end jobs, had no real relationships, and just blindly went through life. Something was missing in his life. He tried filling the void with a lot of different fixes, but he was always left feeling empty inside. Until one day, he did something strange. Something that gave him such a massive rush. He trespassed into a home in his neighborhood. He knew the owners of the house, and he knew they were at work that day. Earlier that morning, they had some workers go to their house to do some kind of construction project. He just happened to see them leave for lunch when he was out on a walk. He did not know what came over him, but he went to the front door and checked if it was locked, and it was not. He walked inside and just took a self-guided tour of their home. This rush of being inside someone else's house was absolutely exhilarating. He stayed at their house for several minutes, and then left before the construction crew came back. After that day, he started breaking into homes he knew were empty just for the thrill of it. He never took anything. He would just walk around and observe people's living spaces. He would get this eerie rush standing in a room, just the feeling of knowing he was there and the owner had absolutely no idea. It was an amazing feeling for him, but just like every other fix in his life, this started to get old as well. That eerie rush eventually just disappeared. Knowing he was in the house soon became not enough. He needed more. He started calling himself a reverse thief. He would go into these homes and leave something behind, something inconspicuous. Even though he would never see the reaction with his own eyes, he would fantasize about their reactions. For example, one time he left a folded blanket on a living room couch. A blanket that he brought with him, not one that the owners already had in the house. The idea of the confusing conversations that would start made him almost giddy. He was like a small child on Christmas. In hindsight, he knew how twisted this was. If he ever came home and saw something like that, he would probably freak out and call the cops. But this reverse thief thing he was doing became his entire life. He would literally base his entire week around it. He started to people watch intensely. Once he had an idea of their schedule, he would locate the home and find a weak area to enter the house when the owners were not home. You would be surprised how many people have a key under a doormat or a fake rock thing that holds a spare key. It was only a matter of time before he started becoming a real terror. He started getting really dark with his games. To give you an idea of how messed up he was, he shared this little story. One time, he left a big pink hair tie and an eyeshadow pencil in the bathroom of a house. He hid in a bush on the side of the house and waited for the couple to get home from work. He needed to hear this reaction. The woman got home first and she was not pleased at all. Her husband got home shortly after and they began to fight. He obviously had no idea what she was talking about, but the evidence was right there in the bathroom. Can you imagine coming home and finding something like that? He knew it would not end well for anyone. He became this mischievous little monster, and he loved every second of it. But it was only a matter of time before he got a taste of his own medicine. One afternoon, when he got home from work, he noticed something strange on his counter in the kitchen. It was a little vase with one small yellow flower. This was for sure something that was not there when he left that morning. Next to the vase was a note. It was written in cursive and said, "We know it was you." He felt physically sick. He checked all his locks, and everything appeared to be locked up tight. He could not think of anyone who could have done this to him. He was always so careful not to leave a trail. He went to his bedroom that night and locked the door. Calling the police was not an option, because if this person actually knew who he was, they could ruin his life. He thought about going back to his parents' house, but that was a headache he did not want to deal with. That night, he did some serious soul-searching. He decided it was time to end his reverse thief charade for good. He woke up in the morning expecting to have another surprise, but thankfully, there was nothing. He ran some errands, and when he got back home, he was not so lucky. This time he did have another surprise waiting for me. Once again, on the counter was a note accompanied by a dead bird. The note said, "We are coming for you." At that moment, he ran to the bedroom and started packing a bag. He was going to stay at his parents' house until he could figure out a plan. But when he got to the room, he heard something shuffling. It was not coming from the room itself. He heard something from the vent. He went over and put his ear to the vent that was on the ground. There was movement coming from downstairs in the basement. There was no doubt in his mind that someone was down there. While listening, he could hear voices, but they were too muffled to understand what they were saying. At least, he thought they were voices. He slowly got up. He was trying not to make any noise, even though he had already been home for several minutes. He grabbed his bag and slowly made his way to the door. Each step he took, he felt like he was making a massive amount of noise. Every time he thought he heard something, he would freeze in place. Once he realized it was nothing, he would continue his slow walk. He got to the front door, which was located right next to the door that led to the basement. His curiosity was killing him. He wanted to know who was messing with him and who was potentially in his house. He opened the basement door. He could hear quiet voices talking downstairs. He was sure that they were voices now. As he took one step onto the creaky wooden stairs, he heard a loud, sharp shush sound. He shouted down the stairs, but nobody shouted back. He knew he had heard voices literally 3 seconds ago. He was too scared to go down there and look, especially if there was more than one person. He turned around and slammed the basement door shut. He crept out of the house quietly. He got in his car, and he kept looking back at the house to see if anyone followed him, but nobody ever did. He drove to his parents' house and told them he needed to stay there for a few days, because the landlord at his place was fixing some major plumbing issues. He ended up staying at his parents' house for a full week. After making it that long without any more weird gifts or notes, he thought it might be safe to go back to his house and see if anyone was still there. While he was staying at his parents' house, he had also contacted his landlord and asked if he could get out of his lease a month early, which the landlord agreed to. He planned on staying at his parents' house for the next month while he packed everything up, just in case these mysterious visitors came back. When he got back to the house to start packing things, the first thing he noticed was that the front door was unlocked and wide open. He knew he did not lock it when he left in a panic, but he had definitely closed it shut. The next thing he noticed was that they had left several more gifts in the kitchen. Another dead bird, some more flowers, and a little toy car that looked exactly like his actual car. He went to the bedroom and listened intently to the vent. He did not hear anything, so he went to the basement door, opened it, and started screaming down there. No noise at all. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen just in case, and slowly went down to the basement. Nobody was there. He felt a brief moment of relief. He thought to myself, maybe they figured he had left for good, and because of that, they left too. At least, that is what he hoped. He was not going to take any chances, though. He grabbed a few essential things and ran to his car. He just did not want to be in that house anymore. Since he had a month to move out, trying to grab everything right now was a waste of time. He reversed out of the driveway, and as he put the car in drive, he saw something. Directly across the street was an older couple standing there. They were not super old, maybe in their 50s or 60s. These were two people whom he had never seen before in his life, which would not be weird on its own. What made it extremely weird was that the older woman waved to him, and he noticed a small yellow flower in her hand. It looked exactly like the same type of flower that had been left on his kitchen counter. The man next to her did not do anything. He just stood there and watched him. He did not engage with them at all. He stepped on the gas and drove away. He looked in the rearview mirror one time as he sped down the street, and he could see them still standing there, looking in his direction. When he was driving back to his parents' house, he took a very roundabout way. He did not see them follow him, but he was completely paranoid now. He spent the next few weeks afraid of his own shadow. Every single noise made him jump. Every person who got too close made him think they were trying to grab him. He could say that this experience changed him for sure. That day he got that first yellow flower was the absolute end of his reverse thievery. To this day he has never been caught. But what is even more disturbing to him is that he still has no idea who broke into his home and why. If it was that older couple, he can honestly say he has no idea who they were or what their motive was. The only thing he can say for sure is that crime does not pay, because eventually you always get what is coming to you one way or another. And that is the strange thing about these types of stories. Sometimes, the people who are committing the crimes end up crossing paths with people who are doing things that are much, much worse. It makes you wonder how many people are out there right now, living normal lives, while carrying these dark secrets with them. They walk among us every day, and you would never know just by looking at them. When you look at the first story, the man who spent months robbing elderly couples by playing on their sympathy, he was convinced he was the predator in every scenario. He chose his targets based on their perceived weakness. He assumed that because they were old and frail, they would be easy to control. But the moment he stepped into that isolated house, the power dynamic completely shifted. He was no longer the one in control. He was trapped in a house that smelled of decay, with a giant man holding a rifle, a limping man named Hank, and an old woman who was not afraid of him at all. And what about the second story? A security guard who thought he had figured out the perfect system to steal from the very stores he was paid to protect. He spent his nights mapping out the blind spots, playing games with the security cameras, and slowly escalating his thefts. He thought he was the smartest person in the building. But then, the whispering started. The laughter of children that could not be seen on any camera feed. A dark shadow that waved at him from the end of an aisle and knew his full name. He tried to convince his supervisor that someone was in the store, but to everyone else, he just looked like a paranoid thief running around with a flashlight and a pair of stolen shoes. He was forced to quit his job to avoid prosecution, and to this day, he has no explanation for what happened. Was it a psychological breakdown brought on by the isolation of the night shift? Or was there really something else in that mall with him? Then you have the final story of the stalker who turned into a reverse thief. He began by tracking a classmate, finding her address, and watching her house from the dark. He felt a rush of power from knowing things about her that she did not know he knew. But then the tables turned. Someone started tapping on his windows. Someone was watching him. He lived in total darkness, terrified to leave his room, realizing exactly what it felt like to be hunted. And when he decided to find a new rush by entering empty homes and leaving strange items behind, he thought he was playing a harmless game of psychological warfare. He wanted to cause chaos in people's lives without ever being detected. But someone was watching him do it. Someone figured out his schedule, got into his locked house, and started leaving their own disturbing gifts. A vase with a yellow flower, a dead bird, and a note warning him that they were coming for him. The final image of that older couple, standing across the street, with the woman holding the yellow flower and waving at him, is something that will likely haunt him for the rest of his life. He was able to get out of his lease and move away. But the paranoia never truly leaves you after an experience like that. You are constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering if the next person you pass on the street is the one who is standing in your basement in the dark. It is easy to think of criminals and victims as two completely separate groups of people. We like to think that the bad guys are always the ones causing the terror, and the good guys are the ones suffering from it. But these stories show us that the world is not always that simple. Sometimes, the bad guys run into people who are much more dangerous than they could ever hope to be. And perhaps that is the ultimate form of karma. When you spend your time violating the safety and privacy of others, you forfeit your own right to feel safe. You open a door to the dark, and you can never be sure what is going to walk through it. These three individuals all managed to escape their situations physically unharmed, but they were permanently changed by what happened to them. They all stopped their criminal behavior because they realized that they were no longer the apex predators in their respective worlds. They were just small fish in a very dark, very deep ocean. It makes you think about the places you visit every day. The lonely country roads, the quiet strip malls after hours, the neighborhoods where everyone seems to mind their own business. You never really know what is happening behind closed doors. You never know who is watching you from the shadows, or what their intentions might be. So, the next time you think you are alone, or the next time you feel like you can get away with something small because nobody is watching, just remember these stories. The universe has a strange way of balancing things out, and sometimes the consequence for your actions is far worse than anything the law could ever hand down to you. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments, and remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. Back when I was 23 years old, I lived in a small studio apartment in Chicago. It was right after I finished college, and to be honest, I was completely broke. The apartment was nothing special, just a single, drafty room on the top floor of a 3-story building, but the rent was cheap and it was close to my work, which was all that really mattered to me. I had student loans piling up and no savings, so I did not have the luxury of being picky. The space was clean, functional, and most importantly, it was mine. The only window in the entire place looked out over a very narrow, dark alley. Across the way was another apartment building that looked almost identical to mine. The alley between the two buildings was incredibly tight, barely wide enough for a single car to squeeze through, and during the day, it got almost no sunlight. At night, it was absolutely pitch black. At the time, that did not really bother me much. I was working very late nights, bartending at a busy lounge on the north side of the city. I usually got home around 2:30 or 3 in the morning, meaning the city was completely quiet by the time I walked up my stairs. Once I got inside, I would kick off my shoes, turn on the overhead lights, make a quick meal, and zone out on my phone until I finally fell asleep. It was a simple, repetitive routine, and for the first month, nothing felt out of the ordinary. But then, one night, everything changed. I had just walked in, turned on the overhead light, and was walking toward my kitchen counter when I thought I saw a quick flash of movement in the window directly across the alley. It was just a flicker, like a curtain twitching. I froze for a second, staring hard through the glass. But when I looked again, there was nothing. The window was dark and completely still. I shrugged it off, thinking that maybe I had just startled a neighbor who happened to be looking out their window, or maybe it was just a draft in their old building. The next night, it happened again. The moment I flipped my lights on, I saw the curtain shift in that same window. This time, I was absolutely sure of what I saw. I saw a human hand pull the curtain back just slightly before letting it fall back into place. I could not see the person behind it because the lights in that apartment were completely off. It was just a sliver of movement in an otherwise black void. But the reason this really caught my attention and made my stomach drop was because I had never once seen the lights on in that apartment. I had always assumed that nobody lived there. That night, I did not sleep well at all. Over the next week, I started paying much closer attention to that window. Every single night, without fail, the curtain would move within seconds of me turning on my lights. It was subtle but unmistakable. It was the exact same sequence of events. There was a slow parting in the curtain, a brief glimpse of the dark space beyond it, and then the curtain would close again. I began testing it to see if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Some nights I would leave my lights completely off and sit silently on my couch near the window, peering out into the darkness. When I did this, absolutely nothing happened. The window across the alley remained completely still, but the very second I stood up and turned on even a tiny dim light, the curtain across the alley would immediately shift. Someone was actively watching me. I tried to find a logical explanation, but the timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. I asked my landlord about the unit across the alley, and he told me it had been vacant for months. He even laughed and joked that I was being paranoid. I considered calling the police, but I felt like reporting someone possibly looking at me through a window in an empty apartment sounded ridiculous. There was no crime, just a terrifying feeling that grew worse every single night. Then one night, everything escalated. I came home around 4 in the morning after a very long shift. When I reached my door, I noticed a crumpled note stuck in the doorframe. I pulled it free and unfolded it. It simply said, "Hey," written in messy blue ink. My legs went weak. My mind immediately flashed to the empty apartment across the alley. I ran inside, locked the door, and looked across. The curtain was drawn, and there was no movement. I immediately called my friend Jamie. Panicking, she told me to come over right away. I grabbed a backpack, stuffed some essentials into it, and got out of there. The next day, I confronted the landlord again and demanded to see the vacant apartment. He hesitated, but eventually agreed to meet me there with the key. The place was thick with dust and completely empty, with bare walls and creaking floorboards. But in the back room facing my window, there was a single metal folding chair. It was positioned directly in front of the window. Whoever had been watching me had access to a locked, vacant apartment. The police were called, but nothing came of it. The realization that my paranoia was correct made me physically sick. I moved out that week. To this day, I have no idea who was watching me, how they got in, or how long it would have gone on if I had not found that note. I sometimes wonder if it was the landlord, but I doubt he would have left the chair there if he was the stalker. I still dream about that dark window, and sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, absolutely certain that someone is still watching me. But as terrifying as it is to realize you are being watched in a crowded city, it is a completely different kind of nightmare when it happens in the middle of nowhere. When I was 12 years old, my family moved to a very rural area in Oregon, miles from the nearest town. We lived on a large plot of land, surrounded by incredibly dense pine forest. It was quiet, peaceful, and completely isolating. The house itself was built in the 1940s and had the typical old house features, like creaky floors, a dark, creepy attic, and a detached, run-down shed that sat about 30 feet from our back door. The shed was packed with old rusty tools and junk from the previous owner. My dad always kept saying he was going to clean it out, but he never did. For the most part, we stayed away from it. The first time I noticed something strange was on a quiet weeknight close to midnight. I was awake, reading a book with a flashlight under my covers, when I suddenly heard our dog Max barking uncontrollably outside. Max was a golden retriever, super friendly but very alert. When he barked like that, it meant something was wrong. I crept out of bed and peeked out the window. The motion sensor light by the back door was on, casting long shadows across the wet lawn. Max was facing the shed, barking into the darkness. I could not see anyone, but Max would not stop. I just watched him for a bit until he finally calmed down, and then I went back to bed. The next morning, we found deep boot prints pressed into the damp dirt between our house and the shed. My dad dismissed it, saying it was probably just a neighbor or a passing drifter, but I could not stop thinking about it. Over the next few weeks, Max barked at that shed multiple times. Every time we would look outside and find nothing, but the footprints would be back, and they always led directly to the shed, never away from it. One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the gravel path outside my bedroom window. I froze in my bed, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped for a moment and then resumed, moving toward the shed. I peeked through the blinds, and the light by the back door flickered on. For just a second, I saw a tall man standing next to the shed door. He was wearing a dirty gray coat, and his face was completely obscured by shadows. Then the light went out. My heart pounded against my ribs as I backed away from the window. I woke my parents, and my dad grabbed his rifle and ran outside, but the man was gone. The footprints were fresh though, leading right up to the shed. This time, my dad decided to check inside, but all he found were rusty tools and old tarps. He added a new padlock and reinforced the doors. For about a month, things were quiet. Then Max went missing. We searched everywhere through the thick woods, up and down the gravel roads, and even asked our distant neighbors, but he was gone. I was completely heartbroken, holding out hope that he was just lost. That night, I could not sleep at all. Around 3 in the morning, I heard our back door creak. I got out of bed and tiptoed into the hallway, finding my dad already up with his rifle. We moved to the back door just as the motion light flickered on. Standing by the shed was the man again. But this time, he was holding a knife in one hand and Max's collar in the other. I felt a horrible weightless dread wash over me, making my knees buckle. My dad shouted and raised his rifle, but the man turned and sprinted into the dark woods. We called the police, and they searched the area, but they found no trace of him. What they did find inside our old shed, however, made me physically sick. The floor had been cleared of junk, and someone had carved disturbing symbols and crude images into the hard dirt. In the corner was a pile of animal bones. Even worse, behind a false panel in the shed wall, the officers found a backpack filled with stolen items, like wallets, watches, and worn clothing that belonged to multiple people. Inside was also a notebook filled with pages of strange symbols, incoherent rambling, and detailed drawings of our house and our family. It was a clear message that he had been watching us. We decided to leave immediately. While we were packing our things, I looked out my window one last time. Just beyond the police tape, about 10 feet into the tree line, I saw the man's face staring directly at me. I screamed for my dad, who ran outside and fired several rounds into the dark woods. We drove away a few days later, relocating to a much less remote area. We never found out who he was, but I will never forget that face in the trees. The move was incredibly fast and chaotic, but none of us cared about the hassle. We just wanted to be as far away from those woods as possible. We never got closure about what happened to Max, and the thought of those other wallets and watches in the backpack still haunts me. Now, some people believe that escaping deep into the wilderness is the perfect way to get away from the dangers of the world. But sometimes the woods hide things that are far more terrifying than anything you could ever find in a busy city. In the summer of 2018, my friends and I planned a weekend camping trip in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The group consisted of Abby, Marcus, his younger brother Tim, Tim's girlfriend Hannah, and me. We were all in our early 20s, fresh out of college, and extremely eager to unplug from our phones, our social media, and our busy lives. We picked a highly remote spot, deep in the national park, where the trees grew thick, the air smelled of pine and damp soil, and there was absolutely no cell signal for miles. The first night was completely normal. We hiked in with our heavy gear, found a beautiful, secluded clearing near a quiet lake with just enough space for our 3 tents, built a large campfire, and cooked hot dogs and marshmallows. We spent the night telling stories, drinking, and staying up late, looking at the stars. The silence of the forest was incredibly relaxing, and we felt completely safe. But during our second night, everything started to feel completely wrong. Around 11 at night, we were sitting around the fire when Marcus suddenly went stiff and pointed toward the woods, asking if we saw that. We all looked, but nothing was there in the darkness. He swore he saw a figure duck behind a tree trunk, maybe 40 yards away. Tim dismissed it as a deer, but 20 minutes later we heard a loud, sharp stick snap in that same direction. Abby got spooked and wanted to go to bed, so we decided to call it a night. We poured water on the fire, zipped up our tents, and tried to sleep. That night I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of heavy, raspy breathing coming from just outside my tent, not even 10 feet from my head. I froze, too terrified to make a sound. I thought it might be one of my friends, but the breathing sounded like an older person who smoked too much. The breathing slowly moved from one side of my tent to the other, and then it stopped. I lay there in the dark, barely breathing, until I finally fell back asleep. The next morning, I decided not to say anything to avoid ruining the trip, but at breakfast Marcus looked incredibly tense. He said someone had been standing outside his tent last night, walking around it multiple times. Tim then confessed that he had stepped out to use the restroom around 4 in the morning and thought he saw a dark figure crouching near our cold fire pit. We searched the area and found footprints circling all 3 tents. In a muddy patch of dirt, we found a very clear footprint of a bare human foot. The tracks led into the thick woods and vanished. This discovery made the atmosphere incredibly tense. We tried to convince ourselves it was just a local hiker, but deep down, we knew something was very wrong. That night, we decided to build a much larger fire and keep our flashlights close. None of us wanted to go to sleep, so we stayed up, talking in quiet, nervous voices. Around 2 in the morning, we heard the distinct crunch of leaves, followed by a low, whispering voice. Marcus snapped on his flashlight, and for a split second, we saw a completely naked man crouching behind a tree. The moment the light hit him, he scrambled back into the trees like an animal. We were too terrified to go to our tents, but hiking out in the dark was too dangerous, so we stayed huddled by the fire. We held our flashlights like weapons, our eyes darting into the shadows. A few hours later, a voice drifted out from the pitch-black woods, saying, "I see you guys." It was a low, chilling whisper that made our skin crawl. A moment later, I felt my tent shift, and I watched in absolute horror as the metal zipper began to slowly slide downward. I screamed at the top of my lungs, causing my friends to start screaming too. The sudden noise scared whoever was outside, and we heard them sprint away into the darkness. We stayed awake until dawn, packed our things, and hiked back to the car. At the ranger station, the ranger told us they had reports of wild men living illegally in the forest who were known to steal and do far worse things. I will never go camping again. The drive home was incredibly silent, with none of us speaking for the first few hours. The shock of what we had experienced was too heavy to process, and every time the car stopped at a red light or a gas station, we all looked around nervously as if we were still being followed. We kept in touch over the next few weeks, but the bond we shared had changed. The easygoing, carefree friendship we had in college was replaced by a shared trauma that we couldn't easily talk about. Tim and Hannah actually broke up a few months later, and I always wondered if the stress of that night played a part in it. I spent months checking the locks on my windows and doors at home, unable to sleep without a light on in the hallway. Even now, whenever my friends talk about planning a trip to the mountains or going on a hike, I immediately make an excuse to back out. The image of that zipper slowly moving down in the dark is permanently burned into my mind, a reminder of just how close we came to a nightmare that we might not have survived. We were incredibly lucky that night, and I thank God every single day that we all made it out of those dark mountains alive. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.